Welcome to the channel. It's Egwin here from Beyond Systems. Welcome to this movement month where I share one exercise every single day for you to tag along. It's different exercises. Some are for strength, some for mobility, some are somatic exercises, some are more for perception, proprioception, and so on and so on. And I always give additional nuggets for mobility, for movement, and how movement and consciousness are also interrelated and connected with each other. If you want to stay up to date with things like that, then please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. And also feel free to like and share the video if you have some friends who feel like, oh, okay, this could be something that is of help to them. Now, the topic for today specifically is a somatic enhanced exercise. We are looking into a specific coordinational component, and it has more to do with perception than with physical training or with mobility or flexibility work. Here is how it looks like. We're going to start in a roughly shoulder width stance. The inside edges of the feet are parallel towards each other, and I want you to slightly drop down into your knees. So you see when I pull my pants away here, my knee is slightly bent. I do not stand with a straight leg and definitely not with a hyperextended knee, so I am in a gentle bend in the knee. Reason for us doing this is because we want one knee always to really tag along with the toes and to link up with the toes. So that's the starting position, feet parallel. And we're doing something very simple. We try to rotate the hip with the focus around one or the other hip joint. Obviously, there is going to be a little bit of rotation in the other leg as well, but the main focus now is really, let's focus on the right hip joint and try to roll the hip around the right hip joint towards the front, and then roll the hip around the left hip joint forward like this. Show it slightly from the side. So from here, rolling the hip joint in and rolling the other hip joint in. Obviously, the knee of the opposite leg, when we try to turn around the right hip joint, there will be some movement in the knee of the opposite leg. Try not to pull the knee in towards the side, but rather move it forward and roll around the hip joint. Now, this is just the beginning of the movement. What I want you to perceive is both your heel and the ball of the foot. Perceive the tension that is currently running through your leg. Just the tension level. No need to be specific about that. Then focus on your hip joint that you want to turn around, and also pay attention to the rest of the body, to your upper body area. Now, when you turn around this hip joint, notice how this feels in the rest of the body. How does this feel in the left shoulder? How does this feel in the right shoulder? How does this feel in the spine? And see, I'm not turning the spine any further. It's simply this trying to turn around the hip joint and then doing it on the other side. Whoop. And just perceive, how does that feel in the rest of the body? What sensations are there in the back of my hip, in my gluteal area? How does it feel in the lumbar spine? It helps if, for this exercise, you stand in such a way that the lumbar spine is relaxed and rather drops down, and the spine is long and upright, rather than standing something like that. However, if this is your current status, rather than trying to put additional tension in to pull yourself up, just stand neutrally. Tune into your feet again. Roll the hip joint. And perceive what part of the body do you feel this in the most? Where is compression? Where is tension happening? All right. And now let's add another component to this. This other component is going to be our arm. So when we turn around the right hip joint, we're going to roll the arm up accordingly. So no, it's not I'm going to lift the arm and I'm going to turn in the hip. No. Now what we're looking for is a connected movement. Connected movement meaning in the same amount I turn in my hip joint, I'm also gonna roll my arm, and this will have an according effect on the rest of my body, on widening my back, on slightly closing the front. And what this exercise is all about is really taking it so slow. This is not an exercise that lives from, okay, now this is what we're going to do, and now I'm going to do 20 reps, 30 seconds break, 20 reps. No, this is not what this exercise is all about. This exercise is about understanding a relationship between joints as soon as we bring them into a position where we allow interaction. This interaction both comes from a connective tissue pull as well as from activity from our muscles, but activity in our muscles that we choose very, very carefully. So rather than, for example, the arm being in a completely different speed, moving in a completely different speed than the leg, rather than something like this, we are really looking for this connection. What happens if we pull the arm slightly forward of the body, like so? This is the starting position. So rather than the arms hanging left and right, we prime one arm. Right hip joint, we prime the right arm. Prime the right arm forward. Try to relax the shoulder. Try to use the minimum amount of tension necessary in the arm to keep this structure. Try to relax the body. And now turn this right hip joint. Try turning this right hip joint and see, is there something happening in the arm if I do not do anything? The answer is yes, something is happening in the arm. If you do not perceive it yet, then that is your part of the exercise. We cannot turn or twist any part of our body without all other body parts being affected by it. And that's what this exercise is all about. I have my right arm out in front here. This is sort of primed. I primed it out of my neutral position into this slightly more engaged position. So I have a little bit more tension, also a little bit more structure in my connective tissue now in this arm, connecting it better to the body. And once I now turn, but I try not to change anything in the arm, then I feel a tension build up. Maybe you feel it here in your hand. You might feel it on the inside of your upper arm here, but that's really for you to figure out. The next step is, rather than defining this arm has to stay here, to allow movement in the arm that is exactly linked to what's happening in the hip. Linked, not in terms of, okay, hang on, should I turn the shoulder actively now when I turn the hip? No, we're talking about this passive link. This, my action is down here, and now I allow movement in the arm to happen, and also in the rest of the body to happen. And see, when I do this, my left shoulder will drop forward a tiny little bit. My right shoulder will naturally drop a little bit further back. And my right arm will naturally slightly internally rotate because of the change in the hip joint that affects the change in the upper body and the center of gravity because one arm is slightly stretched out towards the front. Once I feel this, once I perceive this, and I can make it happen, now I can, if I choose to, fill this passive movement with a little bit more engagement, and then create towards the second half of this movement a second polarity to it. So rather than just activity being down here in the hip area, now also being activity up here, but activity that is directly related and directly linked to what's happening down here. So the activity in my arm now is coordinated perfectly with the muscular activity in my legs and hip through the structure of the connective tissue, rather than through me trying to coordinate it together purely mentally. So this exercise is really about, there are hundreds of exercises like this, and many different possibilities of how you can teach the body its internal interrelations. And this is the beauty of such somatic exercises. Once you do a couple of those, you start to develop an understanding of all of that connectiveness that's going on internally that adds to the body's intelligence in a non-mental way. Because a lot of that is actually not triggered by an existing mental program, but it is triggered by the sensation that comes out of my own passive structure internally, and a knowledge about the basic principles of how to use this opening of a pathway. See, for example, if I prime my right arm rather than towards the front, towards the side, and I turn my right hip, and I play the same game, then I have either a neutral feeling, or if I pull the arm a tiny little bit further back, it will rather drop into an external rotation. So something like this, if I over-exaggerate it, than an internal one. But this is part of the intelligence network that we have internally, how the things naturally relate to each other. And with many modern fitness systems, we unfortunately deprive ourselves of this experience of internal connectedness, which on the other hand is extremely important for us to feel connected to ourselves as well as connected to the outside world and to others. So this not just has medical healing and positive components for ourselves physically, but also mentally and emotionally, and also reaches all the way into our relationships. And the same that we did on the right side, we can do obviously on the left side. So let's just do it. Let's use the left hip joint. Simple rotation. What's happening? Do we feel anything? Or what's going on in the upper body? Is there a lot going on in the upper body, or is the main aspect down here? What is it? And now let's prime the arm forward. Again, it's totally relaxed in the shoulder. You just use the minimum amount of tension necessary to just hold the arm forward with slight activation. And now roll over the left hip joint. Again, knees are slightly bent. At the beginning, without additional movement in the arm, just feel the further you turn in the hip, and you do not turn your arm, the more tension build up you feel in your fascia on the inside here, on the inside of the arm, the more you feel like a rubber band, the resistance growing. And now in the next step, you stand here, you turn. And now the arm is allowed to roll with the movement. When you start to add a little bit of muscular activation, it's basically an allowing muscular activation to fill the openness that you created through this movement. So we can create doorways where movement is enabled or movement is disabled through how we use our connective tissue and how we use the muscular tension. If we are in a hypertoned state with too much muscular tension, there is no way we can perceive those subtleties. And so it's really important, if you want to be healthy and move naturally, to pay attention to those subtleties and to train yourself to be aware of them and then use movement accordingly. And that is the foundation from which you can then start to add a little bit of strength and a little bit more strength, and then you do it with a little bit more load and you're just as well connected. But that's a training process that starts with perception first and coordination. And then from one, suddenly you have 2 activation points in the body, but again, that are not linked mentally, but that are linked through our connective tissue system. They are not linked with any specific mental pattern, but through a physical pattern. And that is another important component, because if you learn to move along your physical pathways rather than just moving through your mental pathways, then this also enables you to more easily take a meta perspective in life, in situations where you normally only try to solve them mentally, and you always run on the same habitual patterns. Moving like this takes you out of mental habitual patterns and connects you with your physical. Many mental components are sometimes stored in the body in terms of muscular tension. But the way we engage the muscles here, muscular tension is secondary, and only very, very intense and very prominent or even traumatic habitual patterns, or patterns that have been repeated for 40, 50, 60 years with high intensity, are then actually also stored in the connective tissue system as a distorted component. But there is still more freedom there than in the mind. Another way to use this, that's the last thing I'm going to say for this, another way to use this knowledge is, say for instance, you go to an osteopath, you have a treatment, chiropractor, totally different story. I'm talking about a craniosacral or osteopathic therapist. You get a treatment there, and then you do things like this, exercises like this. This helps to retain more of that osteopathic or craniosacral effect, because it reinforces the natural pattern of the body, specifically after, for example, a therapeutic experience. So you can combine it with therapeutic experiences, but you do not have to. It's not mandatory. You can also do it as a standalone exercise, play with different angles for the arm and make this experience. And there are many more exercises like that. All right, have a beautiful time trying this out. I hope you enjoyed this video and all the information that's in here. This is really something, it's a fundamental thing that if done properly, if trained properly, you can integrate in every single thing that you do, whether that's bodybuilding, strength training, whatever it might be. You can incorporate it more or less in everything that you do. There are some movements that are more natural than others that will allow you the freedom to do this. I mentioned bodybuilding. Bodybuilding is definitely a movement on the scale of very unnatural compared to what we just did, but still you can ease into the movement using those principles if you really build up slowly, and it can have a regenerative effect on your body structure, so that is another aspect. But things like Qigong, for example, things like dance, whether that's social dance or contemporary or whatever that might be, all of those things, they improve massively. Also, natural movement throughout the day can improve massively. Your posture will improve massively if you just move like that, and it will create more happiness, more joy in your life, and also more grounding, more relaxation, and more peace. And that's just this connection with yourself, and the connection with your surroundings will improve so much. Thanks for watching. Have a beautiful time. Like I said, share this video. It really helps if you put a thumbs up to it, and have a wonderful time. Thank you. See you around in the next update. Bye, guys.